The story of EDF6 revolves around humanity and its struggles to fight against the primers across multiple timelines. The player sees this struggle through the eyes of Storm 1, who fights in the front lines as a soldier that specializes in fighting against the primers. However, there actually is another side to this story that takes place not on the front lines but behind the scenes. The center of this story is this professor who we meet at the beginning of EDF6 at base 251. So, let's answer this question. Just who is the professor? First, let's look at the professor's background. He is the chief of the Advanced Technology Research Division and is responsible for the development of many weapons that are used by the EDF. He has a wife who he loves dearly, and his favorite food is the cheeseburger. At a glance, he does not seem like someone who will have a connection with Storm 1, who has been fighting on the front lines for the entirety of the war against the primers. However, there is one trait that creates a deep connection between Storm 1 and the Professor. That is the fact that the Professor is the only other person aside from Storm 1 that retains their memories when destroying the cross on the ring-shaped ship. Since the Professor is the chief of the Advanced Technology Research Division, his influence is focused on the entirety of the war rather than the outcome of each battle like Storm 1. After going back in time, the Professor serves two main roles: to create better weaponry using the information of advanced technology he retains from the past, and to convince the authorities of EDF of the fact that the primers are time travelers and that humanity needs to focus their forces on the battles that may change the course of the war. In most timelines, the Professor is fairly consistent at completing the first task, giving Storm 1 better weapons as the timelines go on. However, in many of the timelines, the Professor fails to convince the authorities of EDF to do as he says. In Mission 33, Winged Legion, we get to hear the Professor's attempt to convince the Chief of EDF headquarters about the truth of the primers. However, the Chief passes it off as the Professor going insane and tries to send him to the hospital. After hearing the Chief's reply, the Professor tells us that he failed yet again and that this has happened many times already. We hear his attempt for the 7th timeline in Mission 69, the Fortress of Machine Soldiers, but is dismissed yet again since the Chief was already bombarded with many insane theories, such as the existence of an egg-shaped ship and an alien god. Things finally do turn in favor for the Professor, however, in the 8th timeline. In Mission 94, Machine Corps Attack, the Professor decides to approach the Major instead of the Chief and uses his knowledge of where the primers will attack to attempt to create proof that time travel exists. However, the Major quickly rejects his proposal as a baseless delusion and that the Professor is just tired, much similar to how the Chief acted in the other timelines. However, Storm 1's operator, who is also the Major's subordinate, looks at the data presented by the Professor and convinces the Intelligence Division to create a strategy using the information given by the Professor. This strategy leads to Mission 95 Ambush, where the EDF manages to ambush a fleet of teleportation ships that were flying low to avoid getting caught by the EDF's radars. Through this mission, the Professor was able to gain the trust of the EDF authorities and became able to give even more direct support to Storm 1, which is most prominently seen in Mission 105, Second Monster Bird Annihilation Plan, in which the Professor sends multiple EMCs for Storm 1 to use. The Professor's knowledge that the 11th Mothership is hiding behind the moon leads to the EDF nuking the 11th Mothership in Mission 106 Diversion Tactic, giving humanity the ultimate advantage over the primers. The Professor makes his move even faster in the 9th timeline. In Mission 118 Eradication Plan, it is implied that the Professor gives the Intelligence Division information about the path the Urginus will take and that the Varga is effective against the Urginus. Since Storm 1 successfully defeats the Urginus using the Varga, the Professor obtains the trust of the Intelligence Division from a very early stage. This leads to Mission 122 Enemy Air Attack, where the Professor finally contacts the Chief of EDF headquarters again. The Professor asks the Chief to collect the most talented scientists in the world in order to combine all of humanity's intelligence. The Chief replies that he will not collect scientists, but rather the influential beings in politics and business to unite not only the brains of humanity, but humanity as a whole. By achieving this early on, humanity was able to obtain the largest advantage over the primers compared to any other timeline. Now that we know what the professor achieved in order to help humanity obtain victory, let's move on to the next topic. Why was the professor so intent on defeating the primers? Of course, we do have the premise that everyone in the EDF is fighting for humanity's survival. However, even within the EDF, the professor has a strong hatred towards the primers. In fact, he is the one who pushed for the execution of Operation Omega in Mission 147, Scales of Time, which spread pollutive substances across Mars' surface, essentially erasing the possibility of the primers being born. Even though the operator objects that humanity does not have the right to erase the whole civilization from existence, the professor declares that the primers must be erased in order for humanity to survive. The main reason that the professor fights against the primers is for vengeance for his wife. In the first 7 timelines, the professor attempts to protect his wife but fails and is eventually forcefully drafted by the remnants of the EDF and sent to Base 251. Although his wife survives in the 8th timeline, the primer's time alteration changes how history goes, and his wife ends up dying in that timeline as well. In fact, since he does not have his memories of the timelines before the time alterations, all of his experiences against the primers are much worse than what we have seen. Although we see the 8th timeline as the timeline where we were able to obtain an advantage over the primers, the professor only knows the version in which there are the fewest number of surviving civilians compared to any other timeline. Because he retains his memories going back in time, he has repeatedly experienced his wife and millions of other people getting killed by the primers, while the other members of the EDF have only experienced the latest timeline in which there were significantly few casualties compared to the other timelines. Although he does not experience the threat of the primers in the front lines many times, his knowledge of what the primers will do to humanity is only matched by that of Storm 1. Overall, the professor can be said to be the other protagonist of the EDF6 story. Where Storm 1 was the physical force that pushed humanity towards victory, the professor was the one who laid the rails that led humanity to the direction they needed to go in order to achieve victory. Although time chose Storm 1 as the representative of humanity, the professor was just as essential to humanity's victory over the primers. This is going to be the end of this video. If you still have any questions about EDF lore, feel free to ask in the comments and I'll be happy to reply. If you enjoyed this video, it would be great if you could leave a like so that this video can reach more people. If you want to see more EDF6 content, I'll be making more videos about EDF6 in the future, so it would be great if you could subscribe as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.